Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We've been discussing a possibility for weeks now. Will Prime Minister Modi and President Xi meet on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit to discuss the India-China border? Turns out they did earlier this week. But India and China have different versions of that meeting. Also, they can't seem to agree on who asked for it, who asked for the meeting, and what is the takeaway. Will the border tension be dialed down? We'll tell you what we've gathered. Meanwhile, some worrying signs for India vis-a-vis Bhutan. They're holding direct border talks with China, and it has serious strategic repercussions for New Delhi. In other news, some in the West are having trouble digesting India's Chandrayaan success. They're calling the landing fake and also saying that India should feed its poor instead of spending on a moon mission. We have a response for them. In Russia, chaos after the reported death of the Wagner chief. What will happen to the mercenary group now? Why is Germany being called the sick man of Europe again? What is the right to repair and why has Apple done a U-turn on it? Why are emperor penguins dying by the thousands? All of this and more coming up. The headlines first. Russian President Putin will not be attending the G20 summit in India. The summit will be held in the Indian capital on the 9th and 10th of September. Putin did not attend the recently concluded BRICS Summit in South Africa, also the G20 summit in Bali last year. Turkey's foreign minister meets the Ukrainian president in Kiev. The talks focused on reviving the Black Sea grain deal. Last month, Russia had pulled out of the deal brokered by the United Nations and Turkey. Taiwan's vice president vows unwavering support for status quo with China, emphasizing its position as a sovereign nation. Lai Ching-te is a presidential frontrunner for the 2024 election. The remarks come amid rising tensions with China. Beijing has long claimed the island as its territory. Donald Trump surrenders in Atlanta. He is the first former US president to have a mugshot. He was released on bail, a bail bond of $200,000. Trump is facing charges of plotting to overturn Georgia's 2020 election result. Denmark will ban Quran burnings. Desecrations of the Islamic holy book in the country have angered the Muslim world. Copenhagen cites national security as the main reason behind the ban. The legislation will also apply to the Bible and the Torah. And guess who is coming to India? After Messi enthralled fans in Kolkata, it's Neymar's turn to play his first match in Pune. His club Al Hilal and India's Mumbai City FC are drawn in the same group. This is at the Asian Champions League, which begins in September. So it finally did happen. The India-China border conversation. They'll expedite their efforts to disengage. Speculation has been on for about a week now, and a bold hope for truce before the G20 summit next month. As Prime Minister Modi left for the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, there was talk of a possible meeting between him and Xi Jinping. They did meet, not in a formal bilateral format, but they spoke informally on the sidelines, we're told. And this, we understand, happened on Wednesday, the first day of the BRICS Summit in South Africa. And yesterday, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi were seen speaking to each other again. This was the moment. We showed you these pictures. Now let's dive into the specifics. Is a complete withdrawal on the cards? It's hard to say at this point. We know that they've been engaging at multiple levels. Military commanders have been talking. Their focus is disengagement from two friction areas, Demchok and Depsang. Now, the same conversation was taken up at the leadership level in South Africa between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. They're said to have reached a verbal agreement. Reports say they've told their respective teams to fast-track the negotiation. There is no timeline for a complete withdrawal, though, but there is precedent. We've seen this sequence play out in 2017 as well. That's when India and China were locked in another standoff in Doklam on the eastern side of the border. This is between China and Bhutan. Both countries claim Doklam. India backs Bhutan's claims. In 2017, China tried to build a road in this area and India rushed its troops to stop the Chinese. There was a standoff. At that time, Modi and Xi had met in Hamburg. Germany was hosting the G20 summit that year in Hamburg. It offered an opportunity for the two leaders to meet, and after that, India and China withdrew from Doklam. There was disengagement. It led to the resumption of ties. Later that year, China hosted the BRICS Summit and Prime Minister Modi attended it in person. Now, 6 years after Doklam, India and China are in a similar situation. New Delhi is hosting the G20 summit this year. Xi Jinping is expected to attend, but Beijing has not confirmed his schedule yet. With just 2 weeks to go for the summit, the two leaders are pushing for a resolution at the border. So what did Prime Minister Modi tell President Xi? This is what Indian diplomats chose to share.
Prime Minister underlined that the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas and observing and respecting the LAC are essential for the normalization of the India-China relationship.
So India remains firm in its position. China must respect the line of actual control. There must be peace at the border. Without that, India and China cannot return to normalcy. That's what Prime Minister Modi conveyed to Xi Jinping. And what was China's response? Beijing released a statement today, described the talks as quote-unquote candid and in-depth. Which is a curious choice of words. It suggests that the discussion was substantive. But this is not what Indian diplomats are indicating. They describe the meeting as a mere conversation, an unstructured exchange. But China has shared a completely different version. Their statement also makes a claim. It says it was India that made a formal request for the meeting. Now, India has denied this. New Delhi says there was no bilateral meeting. The leaders met informally on the sidelines. And it was in fact China that had earlier made a request for a bilateral. That's what New Delhi is saying. So who asked for the meeting? And what was the nature of the meeting? If they can't agree on something as small as this, can they really resolve the border issue? Well, we can only hope. Now, the Chinese statement does raise some questions. Let's take a closer look again. What does it say about the border standoff? Is there any mention of disengagement or de-escalation of friction points? China has not used any of these words. There's just one mention of the border in the last line. Let me read it out for you. The two sides should bear in mind the overall interests of their bilateral relations and handle properly the border issue so as to jointly safeguard peace and tranquility in the border region. Handle the border issue properly. Non-specific and non-committal. Almost like a footnote. So is China serious about disengagement? New Delhi seems to be optimistic, but as they say, actions speak louder than words. And we're still waiting for those actions from Beijing. You see, the border issue is not just about troop deployment. It's also about China's coercive tactics, the salami slicing of territory, the PLA's psychological warfare. We just told you about Doklam and how China tried to take it. In 2017, their designs failed, but they've not given up. In fact, China has changed its approach and it's working on Bhutan now. This week, there was a meeting in Beijing. China and Bhutan have created a technical team and it's been given an important task, the delimitation of the China-Bhutan boundary. Now, this technical team, it met for the first time this week. And what was the outcome of the meeting? An important decision. China and Bhutan will hold boundary talks. This will be a first since 2016. It hasn't happened in the last 7 years. And why is it significant? Because this could have direct and deep repercussions for India. Time for a backstory. Direct negotiations between China and Bhutan are rare, especially when it comes to the boundary. Their first meeting on this was in the year 1984. That's when they held their first round of boundary talks. That's what they call it, boundary talks. So far, they've had 24 rounds of these talks. The last one happened in 2016. They did not speak after that. 1 year later, there was a standoff in Doklam. It further ruled out any scope for negotiation. This is the region we are talking about, the Doklam area. It is spread over less than 100 square kilometers. Both China and Bhutan claim this region. Both say it's their territory. And this is critical for India. It's strategically very, very important for India. There is a tri-junction at Doklam, a point where the borders of India, China and Bhutan meet. That is the tri-junction. And the 2017 standoff happened at this very same tri-junction. Look at the location of the tri-junction. It overlooks a small sector, an area called the Chicken's Neck. This is India's only link to the northeast, the Chicken's Neck. So securing the Chicken's Neck is very important to retaining a land link to the northeast. And that's why India is wary of Chinese presence here. If China takes control of Doklam, it gets a vantage point. It can potentially cut off India's access to the northeast. So in 2017, when China tried to take Doklam, India resisted. It stepped up for Bhutan. India sent its troops to Doklam. They pushed back the PLA. There was a standoff. The Chinese eventually moved back, but they never gave up their plans. They maintained pressure on Bhutan, and over the years, they've built on their claims. China now claims a much bigger territory of Bhutan. Earlier, it was just Doklam, but now China also claims an area called Beyul Khen Pajong. This is in the north. And this is a sacred Buddhist area. Also the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary. Earlier, the sanctuary was not on Beijing's list of demands, but in 2020, it appeared as part of the territories China claims. With this expanded list, China is pursuing Bhutan for direct negotiations. Yesterday, a statement was released. It said China and Bhutan will expedite boundary negotiations. They have a roadmap for talks, and frankly, this should not come as a surprise because Bhutan has been involved in talks for a while with the Chinese. And New Delhi has been skeptical. Earlier this year, the situation led to a row. Bhutan's Prime Minister gave an interview. His name is Lotte Schering. He spoke to a Belgian newspaper and he spoke about the border situation. He suggested that Bhutan can demarcate some boundaries alone. Let me quote from what he said. Last month, a Bhutanese delegation visited China, and we are now awaiting the arrival of a Chinese technical team in Bhutan. After one or two more meetings, we will probably be able to draw a line. And what did the Bhutanese Prime Minister say about Doklam? He did not deny that India has a role to play there. Again, I have a quote. It is not up to Bhutan alone to fix the problem. There are three of us. There is no big or small country. All are three equal countries, each counting for 1/3. Now, Bhutan and China are discussing the border. They're expediting the negotiation. Where does it leave India? Will India be in the room when Doklam comes up? Given China's record, you can't be sure. Their intentions are questionable. By claiming sacred Buddhist areas, Beijing is attacking at the heart of Bhutan's culture and identity. This dialogue is not about solving the border issue. It is about legitimizing China's sweeping claims on Bhutan's territories. And while Bhutan is a free country, free to talk to whoever they want to, they should approach this conversation with caution. As for New Delhi, this is not looking good. And now let's turn our attention to Russia. The big story is still Wagner, the mercenary group. Their chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is believed to be dead. What does it mean for Wagner and for its global operations? And what does it mean for Russia? Tonight we'll discuss all of that, also bring you updates on Prigozhin's case. As of today, there is chaos brewing. Prigozhin is said to have died in a plane crash. This happened on Wednesday. 10 people were on board. All of them are dead. Was Prigozhin among them? The US and the UK believe that he was. And honestly, his death does not come as a surprise. He did lead a mutiny, a failed mutiny, and that too against Vladimir Putin. He's not known to take prisoners. Putin comes down hard on those who challenge his authority. Prigozhin did it 2 months ago, and now he's dead. Exactly 2 months. Too dramatic to be a coincidence. The West is publicly pointing fingers at Vladimir Putin. Others are whispering in private. There are rumors of a Russian missile attack, an S-300 missile bringing Prigozhin's plane down, or a bomb being smuggled onto the plane in a wine crate. All sorts of stories. We have no confirmation on how the plane crashed. And the Kremlin has denied any involvement. Yesterday, Putin offered his condolences. He said the contributions of the Wagner group will not be forgotten.
As for the aviation tragedy, first of all, I want to express my sincerest condolences to the families of all the victims. It is always a tragedy. Indeed, if there were and the primary data indicates that there were employees of the Wagner PMC, I would want to note that these people made a significant contribution to our common cause of fighting the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. We remember this, we know it, and we will not forget it.
It's not just Wagner contributions in Ukraine. Putin acknowledged the group's role in Africa too and how Prigozhin set up a successful empire there.
He was a talented person, a talented businessman. He worked not only in our country and worked with results, but also abroad in Africa, in particular. He was involved in oil, gas, precious metals and stones there.
Was Putin's message a bit to calm things down, a way to placate the Wagner group and its supporters? Because there has been an outpouring of grief. Memorials have been set up in various Russian cities. People have been paying their respects, and they're doing this for a man who challenged the Russian state, for a man who marched almost to the gates of Moscow. Prigozhin has public sympathy in Russia. There's also anger over his death. Some Wagner fighters have sworn vengeance. They've threatened another march to Moscow. Remember, after the failed mutiny, thousands of Wagner troops went to Belarus. It is not far. So another march is very much possible if that's what they decide. Is that what Putin was trying to prevent with his statement? Or does he have another plan? His reference to Africa was telling. The Wagner group has a strong presence there. They operate in Libya, the Central African Republic and Mali. We know that for certain. It seems there were plans for an expansion. Just look at Prigozhin's last message. It was released on Monday, less than 2 days before his death. This is what he said.
We are working. The temperature is 50 plus. Everything is as we like. Wagner PMC conducts reconnaissance and search actions, makes Russia even greater on all continents and Africa more free. Justice and happiness for the African people. We are making life a nightmare for ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other bandits. We are taking true warriors into service and continue fulfilling the tasks that were set. We made promises we would succeed.
It's an advertisement for Wagner services, especially in militancy-hit West Africa. Think about the recent coup in Niger. The coup supporters were anti-France and pro-Russia. And in Africa, Russia means Wagner. But the people in Niger do not think too much will change.
The death of Wagner's boss is a great loss for us, a great loss. But we must believe he will soon be replaced in order to ensure the continuity of the group's activities.
Wagner has been Russia's long arm in Africa, a way for them to expand their footprint. It propped up the regimes in Mali and the Central African Republic. It's been fighting on the side of rebels in Libya. On Tuesday, a senior Russian defense official visited Libya. He said Wagner troops would report to a new commander. Now, this was 1 day after Prigozhin's video came out and 1 day before he was killed. So Russia was assuring Libyan rebels that Wagner operations would go on as usual. In the Central African Republic, the Kremlin signed a deal with the government. So the plan is that Prigozhin's death should not change very much. Commanders can change, but the deal with Moscow will continue.
I don't think there will be any real impact on what's happening in the Central African Republic. We know that President Vladimir Putin initially brought Wagner here, which was denied. And now everyone knows that Wagner is here. Wagner is the security aspect with their instructors, who are in fact mercenaries. But there's also the commercial, economic Wagner, who traffics in gold, diamonds, timber, and all sorts of other things, but also trades through Russian beer.
He mentioned the economic Wagner. Putin too spoke about it, about Prigozhin's successful business empire. You see, Wagner Group isn't just about mercenaries. They operate mines and logging companies in Africa. They get a part of the profits for protecting oil fields in Syria. Wagner is like a diverse multinational company. And that will be one of its biggest challenges now. Prigozhin is dead, along with his core team. They're the ones who control this vast business empire. It will not be easy to replace them. But the thing is, Russia may not want to replace them. They wouldn't want to create another powerful person like Prigozhin. Instead, they would want to break up Wagner into different smaller businesses and perhaps have some of them absorbed by other firms. After all, Wagner is not Russia's only private mercenary group. There are others like Redut and Convoy. They report to Russia's defense ministry, these groups, so they're considered easier to control. But they aren't anywhere near as effective as Wagner, and yet Russia is encouraging Wagner troops to join these groups. Is it a sign of things to come? Forced mergers between Wagner and other mercenary groups in Russia. It would achieve two goals. The other groups, the other companies, would become more valuable, and Wagner would be finished. The private mercenary business is lucrative. It also helps Russia exert its influence covertly, so Moscow will keep them alive, but also under check. It won't create another Wagner or Prigozhin. Vantage continues after a short break.
What the Chinese are saying, something that's been denied by the Indian side. But this conversation after conversation, these core commander level talks that have been happening, very, very rampant so, and the fact that on the sidelines of BRICS Summit, the two leaders from India and China also really engaged. However, these two crucial points of de-escalation that's required, especially in Depsang and Demchok, that was completely, done away with, that there was no conversation about the same. Why so? And how are we supposed to move forward if that is not being discussed?
See, ma'am, what we must understand is that the requirement for dialogue is not one-sided.
Yes.
It can never be one-sided.
Yes.
It has to be both sides. And I'll give you a technical point of view also. See, the moment we ask for a meeting, it is held in our side of Chushul, the BPM hut which is there, the border postal meeting hut. That is where. When they ask for it, it is held on their side. Now, if you just take out the records, how many times it has been held there and how many times it has been held here, it will be very convenient, and the facts are on ground that it has been both sides. Both sides talk, and that is the mechanism. It's not happening now. It has been throughout from 90s, early 90s. That is the way it is, that whenever there is an issue, both sides reach out and they speak to each other at various levels, at brigade commanders level, major general level, and now at the corps commander level. Okay. 19 rounds of corps commander level, what it has given is that there has been no violence after the June 2020 violence which happened in Galwan. Isn't that a small thing? I mean, two large armies are eyeball to eyeball, and the fact that the corps commander level generals are speaking to each other means that there is some amount of, there is a semblance of peace and tranquility. I'm not saying that there is complete thing, but at least there is a sense that the commanders are speaking. So there is
Let's start our next story with a cartoon. It's from the New York Times. It shows two men sitting inside a room. It's called the Elite Space Club. One of them is reading a newspaper. The headline says, India's Mars mission. It is shown as a man with a cow. India is shown as a man with a cow knocking on the door. I'm sure you'll agree that this is racist and in very poor taste. I'm sure you've seen the cartoon before, including on this show. We've been asking for an updated version. Will the New York Times publish something that is more in tune with reality? We're not holding our breath for a response because the West is back to playing its old games, discrediting India's achievements and questioning India's motives. Let me lay out the facts first. Chandrayaan-3 is an Indian mission in space. It is the world's first to land on the moon's South Pole. This is a fact. As we speak, the Pragyan rover is out exploring, looking for traces of water. This too is a fact. Also a matter of pride for India, a big achievement for science and a gift to the world. But how have they responded? With skepticism, condescension, and their trademark hypocrisy. Listen to this.
As they spend their money on space probes, as they spend their money on the military, they spend their money on nuclear weapons, still half of the country lives below the poverty line. But the biggest injustice of all...
That was Nigel Farage, the man who heralded Brexit, a politician known for his scandals and his hypocrisy. He says India is wasting money on space missions. Why? Because half of its population lives in poverty. The racism is shining through. Also the utter disconnect with reality. We are happy to share some facts with Mr. Farage. It may have slipped his notice that India is the world's 5th largest economy. It is in fact ahead of his country, the United Kingdom. But it seems he can't get rid of his colonial mindset. I mean, how can poor India have aspirations? How can a former colony reach the moon before the so-called Great Britain? And since he's so keen on discussing priorities, we have a question for him. Why does Britain keep paying for the royal family? Their citizens cannot afford their electricity bills. Maybe help them instead of paying for the king and his retinue. Let me show you another bizarre comment. This is from a man called Patrick Christie's. He calls himself a journalist, and this is what he said.
Congratulate India on landing on the dark side of the moon. I would also like to now invite India to return the £2.3 billion foreign aid money that we sent them between 2016 and 2021. We're also set to give them £57 million next year, but I think the British taxpayer should keep hold of that, don't you? We should not be giving money to countries with a space programme. As a rule, if you can afford to fire a rocket at the dark side of the moon, you shouldn't be coming to us with your hand out.
You heard him. If you can afford to fire a rocket, you shouldn't be coming to us with your hand out for foreign aid. Those were his words. But is India going to the UK for foreign aid? Let's have the answer from their own Foreign Office. This is what they said, and I'm quoting. Since 2015, the UK has given no financial aid to the government of India. Most of our funding now is focused on business investments, which help create new markets and jobs for the UK as well as India. This is what their Foreign Office has said. Christie's also mentioned a figure, £2.3 billion. What about that? It's from a report by the UK aid spending watchdog ICAI, and Patrick Christie's clearly did not read the whole report, but we did it for him. The figure is not foreign aid, it includes investments and revenue through multilateral channels. The same report notes that this aid is a tool of UK foreign policy, basically a way to stay in New Delhi's good books. Also, no one is begging for it. But who will explain that to the West? In their mind, this is still the Raj. And these are comments that would have made Churchill happy. But we are happy to burst their bubble. This is the 21st century. India is a global power, not a former impoverished colony. In 2011, then Finance Minister of India, Pranab Mukherjee, told the UK that India does not need its aid. And London admitted that the aid had no impact on India's development. Now, India has landed on the moon, and British influencers say, return our aid money. If you're going down that road, let's start with reparations. Let's start with the colonial loot. Return that money first. And we have the bill. Some $45 trillion. That's what Britain looted from India between 1765 and 1938. And this is just an estimate. The actual figure could be much higher. But even this 45 trillion is about 15 times Britain's GDP. How about London returns this money first? Instead of discrediting India's achievement with juvenile conspiracy theories, look at this one now. It says, India faked the moon landing. What do you even say to this? I don't have a rebuttal, just this video. It shows the Pragyan rover rolling out of the lander, moving on the surface of the moon, leaving India's mark literally and creating history. We know all of this. We don't need validation from the West or cartoons from their press. But we must set the record straight. We need to take control of our stories, we say, else we'll be held hostage to narratives created by others. We'll be trapped in their version of our truth. And speaking of narratives, an old label has resurfaced to haunt Germany. It's being called the sick man of Europe again, and for good reason. Their growth has plummeted, inflation is high, and manufacturing is weak. In the month of May, Germany officially fell into a recession. Today, new numbers have come out and they show that the situation has not improved much. Germany grew by 0%, meaning 0% growth. This is in the second quarter of 2023, hence the label the sick man of Europe. Germany was called the sick man last in 1998 for completely different reasons though. The country had just been reunified, the market was tough, exports had slowed, so unemployment hit double digits. This led to a series of radical reforms, and after that Germany prospered. It became the fourth largest economy in the world and the world's third biggest exporter. In fact, Germany's growth was the envy of Europe. German exports were world renowned, from Adidas shoes to cars like BMW. Germany made a reputation for itself as a hub for world-class production. Then why are they struggling now? Well, Germany now is suffering from a very different sickness. Broadly, the German economy has two pillars of growth, industries and exports. Both have a major impact on their economy, and as we speak, both these sectors are showing weakness. Let's go through this one by one. Starting with German industries, they're producing fewer goods. In the month of May this year, production fell. Germany is known for its cars more than anything else. The auto industry accounts for 5% of their economy. New car registrations fell by over 10%. So fewer cars are being sold. The next month, the month of June, did not bring any good news. Germany's total industrial output fell further. Experts were predicting a 0.5% decline, 0.5% decline. That was a prediction. But how much was the actual fall? 1.5%. So 3 times more. Again, the reasons were the same. Fewer new orders and sluggish output. Then why are they struggling now? All key markets, in fact, bought fewer German goods. German exports to the EU, for instance, fell by over 6%. The United States more than 10%, China 9.3%. And this is in line with a global trend. There is a slowdown around the world. There is a general dip in demand. And Germany finds itself at the receiving end here. So what has been Berlin's response? Initially, they tried to play down the crisis. In the month of May, Chancellor Olaf Scholz appeared before the press. He looked confident. The Chancellor assured that Germany has done enough to avoid a downturn.
The German economy's prospects are very good. We are solving the challenges we face. What you notice is that there is a lot of investment going on in Germany in terms of battery factories, chip factories, which is increasing considerably, and therefore we can be very confident.
So what we're seeing is a stronger slowdown in Germany, for instance, and some more resilience in some of the southern countries, Italy and Spain among them.
Now, we know it did not turn out that way. The International Monetary Fund gave its verdict in July, declared Germany will be the only G7 economy to shrink. And that trend may be here to stay. According to the IMF, German growth will be slower than the United States, Britain, France and Spain over the next 5 years. One of the reasons for that is protectionism. Countries across the world are adopting protectionist policies, meaning they're supporting domestic players over global competition. So policies are designed to help companies at home. That is protectionism. The US and China are the biggest export markets for Germany. They're stepping up their domestic investments. They are pushing companies to create more jobs at home. This will have an adverse impact on the German economy. Exports make up 50% of their economy. This includes goods and services. So can Berlin survive the impact of the slowdown? It's going to be tough. Germany has not made enough investments at home to cushion the blow. Perhaps it's time for another set of reforms. This sickness needs surgery. Antibiotics will not be enough. From sick countries, let's move to something apparently getting better, and that is Apple. The notoriously inflexible tech behemoth, it seems to have had a change of heart. You can now finally start repairing your iPhones. You won't have to keep replacing your MacBooks every so often. You can finally just get Apple devices fixed, because Apple says it will back a new law in the US state of California, the right to repair law. After years of stiff resistance, Apple is making a U-turn. It will finally allow people to repair Apple devices. And we are talking about normal people, not just the Apple employees in their secure facilities. Like we said, Apple has been fighting to keep its repair process exclusive for years. It has tried to hold on to the repair monopoly, which is why repairs are so expensive for Apple products, and why sometimes it seems cheaper to just get the latest model. The repair monopoly helps Apple with revenues. It also ends up polluting the planet more by encouraging e-waste. So this move by Apple is a green one, and it set the ball rolling for a more sustainable future. Here's our report.
There are a lot of human rights. The right to life, work and dignity, even education and free movement. But have you heard about the right to repair? You may not have, because it's not exactly a right yet. It's still just a law about to be passed in some states in the US. But the California right to repair just got a shot in the arm because it has a powerful new backer, the tech giant Apple. What's more, Apple is a convert. It has made a U-turn on its stance. Traditionally, it has opposed the right to repair and even lobbied against it. But now the iPhone maker has seen the light and decided to support this right to repair. Which brings us to the question, what does that phrase even mean? We'll explain with an example. What happens when something breaks in your house? A minor break, like a chair screw falling out, or a small tear in your sofa cushion. Would you just throw it out? Or get the maker of the chair to put the screw back in? Or do you think you'd just do it yourself? Most likely fix it yourself, right? And usually, there's nothing stopping you. After all, you own the chair, sofa, or anything else in your house. It's up to you if you want to tinker with it. What about a bigger problem? Like a problem with your fridge or microwave. If your warranty was over, wouldn't you still call someone to fix it? Not necessarily someone from the company, just a regular electrician. Again, it's your product and you should be able to get it fixed. Well, so far this didn't apply to Apple products. They could only be fixed by certified Apple technicians, officially anyway. You see, Apple spare parts are hard to come by. The company jealously guards its technology, so any unofficial repair shop won't likely have a replacement part for your problem. This is by design. It helps Apple sell its warranties and drives business to official repair centers, where if you don't have a warranty, they can charge absurd sums to fix simple problems. Basically, Apple has a monopoly. But it seems that it wants to give this monopoly up. Apple has extended its support to California's new right to repair law. So, if it passes, Apple spare parts will enter the market. Repair shops will cry tears of joy, and you can try to show off your engineering skills on a very, very expensive device. But, jokes aside, the move is a great step forward towards a greener future. Repair monopolies and their unreasonable costs lead to a use-and-throw culture, which is something Apple has often been accused of encouraging. It's great for the company. Dedicated Apple fans splurge on the latest devices, and the company makes billions. But what of the older products? The old devices become e-waste, destined for landfills. When easy, affordable repairs are possible, we tend to reduce waste. Apple has already been pulled up for e-waste by the EU regarding its Lightning charger. The EU said the unique charger was creating e-waste and ordered Apple to conform to the standard Type-C. It's why the next iPhone can be charged with any standard charger, not just a fancy, sleek, white monopoly piece. The fight against e-waste has just begun. The more our world becomes more and more immersed in tech, the more e-waste we'll generate, and the more we'll pollute our planet. Maybe Apple has finally realized this. It could be the reason for its U-turn on the right to repair. Or maybe it's just self-preservation. After all, the EU forced it to change its charging port. Maybe Apple thinks it needs to play ball to avoid another rap on the knuckles. Whatever the case, the right to repair has a powerful new ally. And with Apple on its side, other companies should start moving out of the way. This can only mean that finally the planet has a win against pollution. Hopefully, the momentum can continue.
And talking about repair brings us to our next story. The Spanish football has a lot of it to do. It seems quite strange because they should be riding the high of winning the Women's World Cup last Sunday. This is their maiden title. But the good that 11 female players did on the field was spoilt by one man off it. And he isn't your average Joe. He's this man, Luis Rubiales. He's the president of Spain's Football Federation. The 46-year-old courted controversy, to put it mildly, just moments after Spain made history. He was on stage for the prize distribution ceremony, and here's what he did. Rubiales kissed Spain's Jennifer Hermoso on the lips. Take a look. First came what looked like a really aggressive hug. I'm not a body language expert, but this seems pretty obvious. Then came the infamous kiss out of nowhere. The 33-year-old Hermoso's first reaction was to say that she felt, quote-unquote, uncomfortable, and who wouldn't? And you know what Rubiales' first reaction was? Predictably, he dismissed it. He called it a small gesture of affection that was being blown out of proportion. People were demanding an apology. What they got instead was an untenable justification. You know what they say? Offense is the best form of defense. It used to be a sporting rule. Now it seems to be a playbook of sexual predators. And remember, this was a tent-pole event. The eyes of the world were on this stage. Rubiales was standing next to the Spanish queen and her teenage daughter. Yet he felt entitled enough to do what he did. Now, amid calls for his resignation and under investigation by FIFA, this is how he has responded.
I will not resign. I will not resign. I will not resign. I will not resign. I will not resign.
No voy a dimitir. I will not resign, he says. And you see the applause. As if Rubiales is the one who is the injured party. Like he deserves our support. Tinder box of testosterone. That would be an apt way to describe men like Rubiales. And there is no shortage of this kind in Spanish football. As the outrage over his unsolicited kiss continues, another incident from the final has come to light. This one involves the Spanish coach, Jorge Vilda. He appeared to be touching a female staff member inappropriately. Even before this, he was not a popular figure in the team. Last year, 15 players had written to the Football Association, their governing body. They threatened to not play for the national team unless Vilda was sacked. They said he was damaging their mental health. And here's how. The coach reportedly forced the players to keep their hotel rooms open till midnight. How would that help them play better? Your guess is as good as mine. This culture of harassment at the workplace is all pervasive. In sports, as in life, ask any woman. This is not an isolated incident. Only the most recent one. Now, before you declare me guilty of feminist theorizing, just like Rubiales blasted what he calls false feminism, listen to this. First, let's dim the gaslight. Now you can say, why don't the abused speak up? Many have questioned why Hermoso did not object right then and there. I can hazard a guess. Practically all women have been told sometime in their life to not be troublemakers. Don't create a scene, just put your head down and play ball, stay out of trouble even if you did not invite it. If you dare to speak up, you risk it all. This silence further emboldens the predators. Like I said before, the Spanish Football Federation president or coach are not outliers. Sexual harassment under the guise of mentorship is not new in sports. In 2021, players of the Venezuelan national football team accused a former coach of sexual harassment. 18% of women in football have suffered sexual harassment at work. That's the finding from a survey done this year. And it's not just football. Remember Larry Nassar. He was at the center of the biggest sex abuse scandal in sporting history. He was the US gymnastics national team doctor. His victims were mostly impressionable minors. His abuse continued for well over a decade, all under the pretense of a medical treatment. More than 300 women accused him of abusing them. And this includes star Olympian Simone Biles. America's most celebrated gymnast said, while the abuse is over, the trauma endures. That is the burden the survivors carry, a scar for life. And what happens to the abusers? Most of them get away with it. Some suffer reputational damage, and very few, like Nassar, are brought to justice. Your safety cannot be collateral damage for your dreams. That should be breathtakingly obvious, but it's not. Fair play is the cornerstone of any sport. But when will the women get a taste of it? After a story on Spain's football chief being iced out, let's talk about real ice. It is changing all over the planet, be it monstrous glaciers or massive frozen seawater. All of it is vanishing thanks to global warming. Snows of Mount Kilimanjaro have melted over 80% since 1912. Many Himalayan glaciers could disappear by 2035. By 2030, practically all of the Arctic's floating sea ice could melt. What about the Antarctic? Its sea ice shrank to a record low this year, following a record low the year before. And this is what followed. Last year, 10,000 emperor penguin chicks died. 4 penguin colonies saw complete loss of their babies. They either drowned or froze to death as the Antarctic sea ice gave way under their tiny feet. Our next report tells you more.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and they're probably right. Look at these satellite images. They show certain regions of the Antarctic over the span of just 3 months, between October and December last year. The sea ice in that area is usually stable, but in these images you can see it break and melt into the water. Remember, this is within a period of only 3 months. If this is disheartening, you may want to listen to what happened next. These pictures are from regions that are breeding grounds for emperor penguins. These adorable furry creatures, they are quite special. Emperor penguins are the tallest and heaviest of penguins. They had given birth to chicks on the sea ice, but as you saw, the sea ice has been melting. So ice eroded from under the feet of tiny chicks. They had not yet grown their waterproof feathers. These feathers are what keep the adult penguins alive. Because of this, many chicks drowned. Others froze to death.
So if it breaks up earlier than early December, the chicks will actually fall into the sea and they will drown. If they manage to scramble out of the sea, their plumage will be wetted and they'll die of hypothermia.
Not 10, not 100, but 10,000 penguin babies died because of melting ice. This is catastrophic, to say the least. Nothing like this has ever been seen before. The regions had 5 emperor penguin colonies. All but one saw 100% loss of chicks. Why did they perish? Take a wild guess. Thanks to global warming, which is melting ice across the world, be it on glaciers, mountaintops, or on oceans. Ice is disappearing, and the Antarctic is unfortunately no stranger to this norm.
The world's largest ever heat wave in terms of deviation from the normal temperature happened last year in Antarctica, where the temperatures were 38 degrees warmer than they should have been. That's absolutely unheard of to have a heat wave of that magnitude.
Across the whole of Antarctica, there was 2.7 million kilometres square of sea ice lost compared to what we would have expected for the same time of year. So that's about the same as 10 times the area of the United Kingdom.
Antarctic sea ice shrank to a record low this year. It was a record low the year before as well. It was a shocking blow. Very different from the other polar cap, the Arctic. That saw a gradual decline in ice. We lose 13% of Arctic sea ice per decade. Over the past 30 years, the oldest and thickest ice in the Arctic has declined by 95%. By 2030, practically all of its floating sea ice could melt. What happened to the penguin chicks is a harrowing sign of things to come. Over 90% of emperor penguin colonies are predicted to go extinct by the end of this century. Polar bears, walruses, Arctic foxes, snowy owls, reindeers, and many other species will perish. But it isn't just the animals who are in danger. So are humans. Just as we are part of the problem, we must face the music too. Global sea levels are rising. Coastal communities are under direct threat. Calamities are getting worse and more frequent. Food insecurity is increasing. Millions are at risk of being displaced. All in all, our ecosystem will be completely disrupted because sea ice is melting. We will say what we always do. If only we had $1 for every time we said this, but here goes. If countries achieve the International Paris Agreement goals, if they limit global warming to under 2 degrees, the sea ice may recover. If it gets cold enough, the sea ice will reform.
Now, unless we want to see a lot more of these things happening in the future, we've really got to get on with decarbonising. That won't solve the problem. right? There will be adaptation that's absolutely needed. But if you're looking for an additional reason to decarbonize, as if we needed one, an additional reason to decarbonize was look what's happening to Antarctica. Look what we are doing to the Antarctic continent.
We need to decarbonize. We will all be better for it. So will the emperor penguins. They may lose about 30% of their population, but at least they won't go extinct.
Now let's talk about another crisis the world is turning a blind eye to. Myopia or short-sightedness. It's where people can see close-up objects clearly, but their distance vision is blurry. Myopia is a largely unrecognized epidemic. It is targeting the young. An entire generation of nearsighted kids is growing up right before our eyes. In fact, many are going blind. High myopia is a leading cause of blindness in China, Japan and Taiwan. In China, 90% of the teens are myopic. Same for Taiwan, 90% high schoolers are myopic. In Japan, more than 60%, and in South Korea, Seoul, 97% 19-year-old men are myopic. What about the rates in India, the US and Europe? Well below 50%, but rising sharply. In fact, by 2050, half of the world population could be wearing glasses. Why is this happening and what can we do to fix it? Our next report tells you.
The world is myopic about a number of things. Climate change, wealth gap, gender parity, you name it. Before we call it a day, let's add another issue to that list. We're talking about myopia itself. The world seems to lack foresight. It can't see the epidemic of myopia that's brewing right before everyone's eyes. What's worse, it's targeting the young. Kids, teens, young adults. You pick the age group and chances are you'll see the young under threat from myopia. A disease they didn't see coming and a disease that's making many go blind. First, let's talk about the basics. What is myopia? It refers to short-sightedness. It's an eye disorder. People with myopia can clearly see close-up objects. For example, they can read a book. Wait, let's be real. They can watch a reel on their phone without facing a problem. But their distance vision is blurry, meaning they can't see the blackboard or recognize faces of people standing at a distance. And this isn't ideal, even for the antisocial. So myopic people usually wear glasses or contact lenses to correct their vision. After all, not everyone can be Spider-Man. Over the past few years, there has been an explosion of myopia in Asia. In China, 90% of teenagers and young adults are myopic. In the 1950s, that figure was 10%. In South Korea's Seoul, 96.5% of 19-year-old males are short-sighted. Singapore has a myopia rate of about 80% in young adults. In Taiwan, 90% of high schoolers are myopic. And in Japan, over 62%. Around the 1950s, that number was just 11%. In other parts of the world, these numbers are relatively lower. In the US and the UK, myopia rates are below 50%. But even if these numbers sound better than those in Asia, it's not cause for happiness. They all saw a sharp rise in just the past few decades, much like the Asian outlier, India. It's another example of this phenomenon. Today, 21% of children suffer from myopia, a relatively small number, but back in 1999, it was about 4%. In fact, numbers are increasing so sharply all over the world, doctors estimate that by 2050, half of the world will be wearing glasses. The problem is already getting out of hand. High myopia has become the leading cause of blindness in Japan, China and Taiwan. If current trends continue, the situation will only get worse. Millions more people around the world will go blind and much earlier in life than expected. So the question is, why are so many children becoming myopic? In the past, a number of factors were blamed. Brown hair, long heads, pipe smoking, pregnancy, big eyes, muscle spasms. Thankfully, today they're all folk theories. Now ask anyone and they'll blame mobiles. A few years ago, they would have blamed television or reading under the covers with a bad flashlight. Then there's genetics. They say if your parents have glasses on, so will you. But that's not always true. This begs the next question. What is the main problem? It's the lifestyle of children. In a nutshell, the more time kids spend outside, the less likely they are to develop myopia. Looking at distant objects helps children. So does outdoor light. Sunlight is great for their eyes. This explains why the silent progression of myopia hastened during the pandemic. In 2020, an average 8-year-old was spending over 5 hours a day glued to screens. And that's just for fun. Add more screen time to that for schoolwork. The problem is real and the pandemic made it worse. But now that it's over, we are free to go out and play. Because as it plays out, for children, venturing out is serious business. At this point, they need it. They need to detach from their mobiles and tablets and spend time out in the open, even if it's for a few hours of playtime, or for a hobby, or to take their pet dog for a walk. Because myopia is like a ticking time bomb. In order to defuse it, we must carry it outside.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story, starting with dramatic footage of an Argentine woman. She hung from a cable and slid down to escape from a burning building in Buenos Aires. Speaking of dramatic footage, water gushed from a burst pipeline in India's Mumbai. The leakage threw up water 70 feet in the air. After height, let's also talk about weight. From tigers to penguins, all kinds of animals jumped onto weighing scales in a zoo in London, making it the cutest annual health check. And finally, what makes August the 25th significant? We're taking you back in history to the year 1944. On this day, Paris was liberated from Nazi Germany's occupation. This marks a significant event during the Second World War. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
To get the terminology right over here and the kind of statements that have come out time now. Sushant, I want to bring you in here. I wanted to understand that there was one statement that was released by the Chinese side. There was another supplementary statement that came in by way of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, where they claim about the historical legacy of the line of actual control and how their position has been really consistent for so many years. Why this change of stance? Why this beating around the bush? How does one read it?
I don't think it's beating about the bush. The statement that this is a historical, it's a legacy of history, is it's a pretty standard formulation of the Chinese. It's been there in statement after statement. The other statement which they are saying, and over which I think a lot of people are getting their knickers in a twist, is that India asked for the meeting. So what if India asked for the meeting? The government of India has denied it. But my point is that even if India asked for a meeting, why not?
Considering this is an escalation of attack by Rahul Gandhi in the name of his Ladakh visit, he's constantly raising these allegations against the government at the center of the ceding of land by China, and they've come far into the Indian territory. On what basis are these claims being made, Sujata?
You heard. A very warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. We dive into the segment with breaking inputs coming in as far as Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Karnataka is concerned. Now, according to MEA, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping met on the sidelines of BRICS Summit 2023, and Prime Minister underlined the maintenance of peace and tranquility. In fact, we have some breaking inputs coming in as far as Prime Minister's visit to Karnataka with regards to honouring the ISRO's efforts are concerned. Karnataka is now one state where the BJP is also preparing heavily as far as the upcoming elections are concerned. But as of now, as far as Prime Minister's visit is concerned, we are learning that Congress is extremely irritated, and so is Karnataka's Chief Minister for being barred from receiving the Prime Minister at the airport. For more political ramifications of this development, let's quickly go across to our political editor, Pallavi, who's joining me on the phone line. Pallavi, before we delve into the political ramifications of Prime Minister's visit to meet the ISRO scientists, do take us through what the BJP is planning. Why is the BJP planning this spectacle, first of all? Because remember, they've seen a major defeat during the assembly election. What is the meaning of Prime Minister's visit?
So the Prime Minister essentially is going to go around straight from Greece, not come to Delhi as it was earlier planned, but now going to get Bengaluru. But he's not going to make it a political visit. It's essentially what, according to the Prime Minister's office, is he's going to go across, meet all the ISRO scientists, the entire team, congratulate them, and also pat their back for the work done by for them. And that's the short ceremony. We're expecting him to touch down around 6 a.m. He's going to spend roughly an hour, is what we are being told. And then, of course, he's going to leave for Delhi. It's in Delhi. There could be a possibility that some ministers, of course, would come to meet him for a successful trip, as is usually the case. So that's essentially the point which they're trying to make when the Prime Minister has decided that it's fair and it's right that the scientists who've got us so much of fame should actually be felicitated.
Right, Pallavi, but the Congress party has called it petty politics, considering the Chief Minister will not be there to receive the Prime Minister, and that is, of course, against protocol. This is what Congress is alleging. Is opposition BJP now using this as an opportunity also to instill confidence among its own workers after the defeat that they faced in the assembly election?
We'll have to wait for some kind of an explanation either coming in from the Prime Minister's office or from the BJP as to why, if that